right. Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of Cytorus Technologies, Prevail, Redspin, and Carasoft, I would like to welcome you all to today's webcast, Achieving CMMC, Tangible Lessons from the Field. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. If you could all please direct your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, we will do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation, including all of the questions that were submitted at the time of your registration for the event. If for some reason we don't have a chance to get to all of the questions, our team will be sure to follow up with you offline after the presentation. This webcast is being recorded, and a link will be sent out in a follow-up note for you to view it again or share with a colleague after the fact. I am also pleased to mention that we will be offering one continuing professional education credit for this event for those in attendance, and in order to qualify for the event, you must be present, registering your attendance by signing in with your full name and actively participating in the polling questions throughout the entirety of the webinar. So keep an eye out for those to pop up as we go. If you would like more information on the CP credits we're offering, our sponsor NASBA, or the submission process, please feel free to visit that link in the middle of your screen right now, that Cara.io link right there. And if you do meet all of today's requirements, you will receive a certificate of completion within 2 weeks of the event. Now, I would like to tell you just a little bit about Carasoft. Carasoft is the trusted government IT solutions provider and a top GSA schedule holder, supporting an ecosystem of manufacturers, resellers, integrators, and consulting partners committed to serving the public sector. The dedicated cybersecurity and defense team at Carasoft specializes in providing federal, state, local, and education customers with a variety of cybersecurity solutions to secure their cyber ecosystems. Our comprehensive cybersecurity portfolio of products and services can support your organization's needs in all of the below categories on your screen there. And our contact information will be displayed at the end of the presentation, so please do not hesitate to contact us for any of your needs. And at this time, I would like to hand it over to our moderator for today's session, Alex Whitworth, who is a sales director at Carasoft. Alex, the floor is all yours.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you providing that intro. And thanks everybody for joining us today for our webcast, Achieving CMMC, Tangible Lessons from the Field. Really glad to have everybody here. Thanks everybody for your responses on the registration form. We had some really great questions, most of which will be addressed today. The timing of today's event couldn't be better. With the DoD's release of the draft DFARS rule to the White House, and then soon to be released for public comment, the focus on CMMC really is picking up. So I want to set the stage for a few moments here before we introduce the panel and outline our goal. So the goal for today is to help you and your security teams prepare for NIST 800-171 compliance and the DoD's cybersecurity maturity model certification. Small and medium-sized defense contractors handling CUI are already required to meet the NIST 800-170 standards, but many are confused on how to get started and what tools to use. So today, our panel is going to cover a lot of those topics. We're going to talk about common challenges encountered during live joint surveillance assessments, how DIB organizations are protecting the confidentiality of CUI, how to manage the cyber maturity and compliance process, and then how to remediate some of the common gaps to compliance. So we've assembled a great panel today. Let me introduce each of our panelists. From Redspin, we have Thomas Graham, PhD. He's Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Redspin, and Robert Teague, the Senior Manager of CMMC Services at Redspin. So for anybody who's not familiar, Redspin is the first authorized C3PAO and has experience conducting multiple DIB-CAC joint surveillance assessments with subcontractors, prime contractors, small businesses, and large businesses alike. They're going to share common challenges from the perspective of a C3PAO that's conducted live CMMC joint surveillance assessments in the field. So welcome, Thomas and Robert. And then from Prevail, we have Noel Vestal, the compliance officer at Prevail. For anybody who's not familiar, Prevail delivers a platform that enables organizations to easily, securely store and share controlled unclassified information for CMMC and NIST 800-171 compliance. So Noel is going to bring the perspective of how organizations are protecting the confidentiality of CUI from an encrypted email and file sharing platform provider. And then from Cyturus, we have Robert Hill, CEO. Robert and Cyturus are an industry-leading continuous compliance and risk management platform designed to support unlimited frameworks. So Robert's going to discuss strategies for managing the cyber maturity and compliance process from the perspective of a compliance and risk management platform provider. And then myself, I'm Alex Whitworth. I'll be the moderator. I'm representing Carahsoft. So Carahsoft is the trusted CMMC distributor. Our subject matter experts can identify the right technology for unique environments. We connect organizations with service providers and consultants that help them prepare for CMMC assessments. And we provide news, educational material, events like the event we're having today, and other resources to help you gather information and make good decisions. So I'm going to share some perspectives on how to best remediate common gaps, leveraging tools and service providers focused on supporting the DIB. So with that's our panel. I mentioned the timing of today's event couldn't be better. I'm sure most everybody here saw the news back on July 4th when the DoD released the draft DFARS rule to the White House for review, and we can now count the weeks on one or two hands of when we'll see the draft rule for public comment. So I wanted to hand it over to Rob Teague to summarize the latest updates with the CMMC DFARS rule before we get into the panel. Rob?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Alex. As you know, the rule has hit the hands of the Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB, mainly in the hands of one of the divisions inside the OMB, which is OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. They'll have this rule for 90-day period, and then up to 90 days, and then they'll release it for a public comment period. The public comment period will be 60 days, after which, when it closes, the DoD will get back to work and address all of the comments prior to the rule finalizing. The DoD, and last words we've received from them and the Cyber AB, is that they anticipate the rule being finalized in Q1 of calendar year 2024. And verbiage, CMMC verbiage, starting to hit the contracts by Q4 2024. That's calendar year. One last thing, there's been a lot of speculation about some kind of, this flipping to an interim rule. I just want to say that from the start, the DoD has mentioned that they intend to send this through as a proposed rule that could always flip to an interim rule. But right now, the last word we have from the DoD and the Cyber AB is that it's going to continue to go as a proposed rule. And there you go, Alex. We're up to date.
All right. Appreciate that. It's timely, so wanted to make sure we address that here at the beginning. All right, let's get into the panel. It's an interesting time to be in our field, obviously. The formula for today's discussion is we plan to have the Redspin team first tee up a common challenge that they're encountering during their live joint surveillance assessments. And then in response, we'll hear from each of the other panelists on how this challenge can be addressed, leveraging tools, leveraging processes, leveraging technology. So let's start off with the first topic. I want to talk about challenges that we see with documentation. So Robert, Teague, or Thomas, could you tell us some of what you're seeing in the field related to documentation that DIB organizations are struggling with? So challenges related to documentation that you've noticed.
Yeah, so I'll start it off and then pass it to Thomas real quick. So one of the main things we're seeing is that a lot of folks and organizations out there are addressing the practices. They're doing really well doing that. However, there are 320 objectives that are scattered throughout NIST 800-171, and each one of those must be addressed in your documentation. And that's where it's kind of lacking. So, the feeder into that is a lot of organizations are displaced with remote workers. Many of them control their own processes and procedures to their parts of the network, and thus they draft up their policies and procedures in a vacuum and try to get it to the overarching organization to draft and adopt into the overarching program. That it becomes a gap, because when we read the SSP, it does not reflect what is in the policies and procedures, or vice versa. So Thomas, anything else on it?
Sure. And just to go a little bit more in detail with what you were saying, Rob, keep in mind the SSP is one of the most, if not the most important documents for an assessment like this. The biggest problem that I've seen with organizations that have been going through joint surveillance, not even formal CMMC yet, has been when they're constructing their SSP, the biggest thing that they've been doing is either saying, yes, we're doing this, or providing a generalized overview versus what the SSP is intended for. And the SSP is intended for, and just as a reminder, the P stands for plan. It's supposed to be describing how an organization is addressing not only the practice, but those individual objectives that you mentioned, Rob. Mm-hmm. And you can point to the policies and procedures, or honestly, any other document or even other areas of the SSP for any of those particular areas, but it should be identifying how the organization is going about addressing these things, instead of just saying, yes, we're doing it, like you see with some other assessment types.
Right. So when we run into these kinds of issues, there's definitely tools and organizations out there that can assist. So I'll first kind of pose a question to Robert so that he can kind of address from Cytorus's perspective of what your solution can do to aid those kinds of organizations that are so scattered. Everybody's working in a silo. How do they see in real time what's happening with the documentation so that they can incorporate it into the overarching program of, governance without disparity?
Robert, that is an excellent question. And that's why utilizing spreadsheets and other, what I call 2D type solutions, really aren't effective. You have to be able to have a central repository where each of those, what we call that document provenance, that diary of evidence, is able to be stored. Where if there are desperate folks in different parts of the country, work from home, et cetera, different diverse offices, they're able to work in a single place, and you have that history, you have that provenance, you have the ability, to Thomas's point, you have to put in a control summary. How are you doing those 320 individual objectives? And then an implementation solution. It's not just, here's our policy, and then here's our provenance on this policy. It is, how does this policy enact change within the organization? How does following this policy, what is the technical implementation of these controls? What is the control solution that actually meets? And you have to, and this is iterative, Robert. This isn't just one and done. So you have to be able to capture that iterative process. So when you come in as a C3PAO and look at this and audit it, it is, okay, this is where you were. This is where you are. This is the work effort that was performed. And this is the history, that provenance of how we got to this point. And this is the end result of that. So a platform or tool that's chosen by the organization has to be robust enough to be able to manage all of this disparate piece of information and articulate that in a method that you as a C3PAO, as the auditor, can actually interpret and answer the question, is it validated met, or is it validated not met?
Awesome. And Noel, I know Prevail, you guys have policy solutions that folks can
absolutely
pick in. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, as Redspin knows, and also, I mean, we work with Cyturus. Actually, we use their product internally as well. And I cannot say enough about how amazing Cyturus is. It's fantastic. But yeah, definitely. We do have multiple compliance documentation bundles with SSP templates and policy templates. We have POAM templates. We have a whole educational series of videos, which Redspin actually joined on some of those. And thank you guys. So yeah, we have a very deep commitment to compliance and to CMMC. I'm the compliance officer. I'm a CCP. We have other CCPs on staff. We take this very seriously. So absolutely, we are here to help, especially those small and medium businesses like you were talking about. When I was listening to you talk about, oh, it's just, there's this disconnect. I hear that all the time from our customers. Well, how am I supposed to make sure that it's always the same in everything? And we all know, everyone on this panel is very well aware of how one control is never just one control. It never is. That control affects so many other families and so many other controls. And so I don't blame anybody for feeling overwhelmed. You're trying to make sure that, okay, if 3.1.1 is this, okay, is it true here? Is that the same thing here? Did I say the same thing there? It's difficult. It definitely is.
So, speaking of those silos, Robert, I mean, we also use Cyturus. Absolutely love the tool. So now we're making Robert's head grow. But,
good.
But what about for organizations that have subcontractors, Robert? Because that's one of the greatest things I love about the tool.
Absolutely. And that is something that is a critical area that a lot of people, I should say critical area of risk that a lot of people miss. And Robert, the amount of information that is being collected, the evidence, the attestation, much of this can be compiled together and actually create CUI. And so this is very sensitive information. And too many times organizations are just happy, oh, I'll email that to you, or here, just download it from this site. So now you have lost control to those subcontractors of very critical information. And that's the core concept of protecting CUI. And here in the actual process of getting certification, you're breaking that process in giving that information to many subcontractors. So you have to have the ability for those those external organizations, those subcontractors, to log into your system, be able to view those documents, be able to review, have you as a C3PO, those auditors review. It does not mean you have to download, does not mean that you want to take the liability of taking that into your systems. And so the tool has to, whatever tool that the organization chooses to use to comply with their CMMC certification, it has got to be able to manage the life cycle of this documentation, not just what we talked about earlier, that provenance, but also, is there an ability to tell who downloaded it, what they did with the document? Because so many organizations lose control of this documentation when they start sending it to contractors, start sending it to subcontractors, start sending it out even to auditors.
Mm-hmm. No, great point. And the word that you mentioned a lot was control. So for everybody listening, that is what CMMC is about. It's all
that is
DFARS 7012. It's all about control.
All right? About that. And I was just going to piggyback too on that. You're talking about subcontractors and how, and Robert, nail on the head. That is such a huge area of risk, and it is. And I know that we have had multiple customers in the past, 8 months, basically since the beginning of the year, who have gotten letters from their prime organizations who are saying, hey, we're not messing around anymore. Like you have to do this. I've had multiple conversations with customers who are freaking out because their prime has said, if you can't get this done in X amount of time with this SPUR score, we're done with you.
Yep.
That's it. Like they're pulling the plug. So yeah, it's very serious.
We've seen that for over. Oh, I'm sorry, Thomas. We've seen that for over a year with some of the primes coming back and setting deadlines for their subcontractors to have this implemented, regardless of what the DoD is doing.
Absolutely.
With OMB and the rule, the primes are recognizing that this is a reduction of their risk.
Exactly.
So they are forcing this down the channel and using a platform that has the ability to look into that. Those primes can now look down and see all of their subs and those scores within a single tool and validate that it's not just, oh yeah, we're saying we do this, but the validation and attestation that they are actually performing that. Thomas, please.
No, I was just going to say, we've been going down the rabbit hole with subs for a prime, and it definitely is very important for those prime contractors because they have to maintain awareness of their supply chain, which in this context is the subs. But we haven't talked about a larger segment that is going to affect multiple organizations when you're talking about CMMC and where things like this can come into play. That's those external service providers, those MSPs, those MSSPs, all of the ancillary organizations, because keep in mind from what we know right now, there's two types of assets that are categorized by CMMC that come into play for all 110 practices. Those are anything termed a CUI asset. So if it stores, processes, transmits CUI, it's in play. The second thing is those security protection assets, those that are providing security protection for any of the systems or services within your scope boundary. The specifics on how MSPs and the other external service providers are going to be addressed once the final rule comes out. Right now, that is just speculation. But at a minimum, when you're going through assessment, if they interact, if they have a bearing on anything that's within your scope boundary, you as the OSC, the organization seeking certification, have to maintain visibility into that. So please, keep in mind when we're talking subs, this can also, CMMC also applies to your supply chain as well from that external service provider perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Speaking of control, we'll pass it back to Alex.
Yeah, no, great discussion so far. Appreciate all the commentary. Let's go to the second topic. Second topic is FIPS validated cryptography. So a few of our audience members asked questions about FIPS encryption in the registration questionnaire. Robert or Thomas, could you talk to us about some of the gaps you're seeing related to encryption in your joint surveillance assessments?
You want me to take this one, don't you, Rob?
I was gonna say, I know that face. He definitely
It's his favorite topics.
I don't know if it's my favorite topic.
Oh, it is.
Oh, it is. It is.
All right. So for folks, that for awareness, if you're not familiar with what FIPS 140 TAC 2 validated is, it's a validation program on the encryption module that an organization uses for their encryption. The delineation here is if you're, let's just say you use an AES 256, that's an algorithm. That's not a module. So anytime where it comes into play, anytime that you're using encryption for the protection, i.e. the confidentiality of CUI, then as it stands right now, it's got to be FIPS 140 TAC 2 validated. If you are unsure whether what you're using is, number one, go to them and ask, because if they've been through the program, more than likely they're very happy to tell you, because it's not something very easy to get through. The second thing is, if you're looking for solutions that can meet that FIPS 140 TAC 2 validation, go to NIST's cryptographic validation program. I'm not sure the specific acronym that they use. You can Google it, but if you go there, you can actually search for these things either by vendor type. There's a ton of different things. But when you're going through assessment, the key note to understand is for those components, and it has bearing in a couple of different areas, you have to provide the validated module certificate numbers. And that's so that the assessors can go and make sure that it actually is current. And, keep in mind, just like any other certification, the validation program through NIST, it is only for specific timeframes. So if you've had it in place for a number of years, make sure that the current certificate you're referencing is actually still valid, and the organization hasn't went back through the program. Rob or Noel, did I miss anything with regards to that?
No,
Well,
I think that was pretty good. Sorry, did you want to say something, Rob?
Yeah. Before we go to Noel, because you guys definitely have the solution for this. But
Yes, definitely.
Don't forget organizations that are out there. If you allow mobile devices to access that CUI data, that includes those devices. If you allow removable media to access CUI data, that includes those devices. Wherever your data is resting must be encrypted. So anything revolving around the CUI and what devices touch it must have FIPS. So go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'm glad you said that. I was going to just show really quick. So the certification that Thomas was talking about, this is ours for Prevail, FIPS 140-2. Cryptographic module validation program is what he was referencing. And you see here, there's a certification number and there's an expiration date for the whole module. So that's what Thomas was talking about, just so everybody can kind of see it. And I think that part right there, that word validated, has so many, I'm sure you guys at Redspin especially have gone through this so many times. I've had so many different conversations with people who say, oh, well, but I'm using, this kind of, this is the algorithm I'm using, so it's fine. Okay, great. Do you have a FIPS 140-2, CMVP certificate? No. Okay, then it's not validated. And that's the problem, is that word validated. It has to be FIPS validated, 140-2 validated. I think a lot of people do not have any understanding that means this. So I'm really glad that you brought this up, Thomas, and we're having this conversation because, yeah, for us at Prevail, I mean, obviously this was incredibly important for us because we're very committed to compliance. But there are a lot of other companies out there who will tell you that maybe they do have one of these, maybe they're under someone else, or maybe it's just a part of what they're using, but it's not the full module. It has to be the full module, the whole thing.
What you see often, a lot of times, is organizations will say FIPS 140 TAC 2 type or FIPS 140 TAC 2 compliant. Anybody that may be listening in that has been through CCP training with me, they know one of the things that I beat into folks' head is, in this arena, words mean something. And
very much
at
so.
this point, validated has a very different meaning from type or compliant.
Yep. Alex, back to you.
Right. Awesome. All right, let's switch gears then to the next topic. This one is least privilege access. So Redspin team, have you seen organizations struggling to demonstrate certain aspects of least privilege access in your joint surveillance assessments?
Yeah, so I'll start it off and then pass it to Thomas. So most of the things that we're seeing with this is when you read NIST 800-171 and the particular practices surrounding this, it's identifying, right? Identifying the different things or functions that the different users and privileged users can do. A lot of folks are not defining that in documentation, and that's where they're missing the mark. So when we say define, if you have a regular user, what can they do on the network, right? They can access email or whatever the case may be. What do your privileged users do, right? Do they, you need to list out all the things that they do on the networks, such as administrative things and et cetera. And then you have to tie it to the least privilege. So those individuals only have access to what they need in order to accomplish their tasks. Right, Thomas, a little more.
Yeah, so I would say more organizations are doing a better job with defining privileged and non-privileged users. Where I, if my memory serves, in full disclosure, I lost my mind a long time ago. The area where organizations often don't do as good a job is when you start talking about least functionality. So defining, what those non-privileged functions are versus the privileged functions versus the security functions. Because keep in mind, when you're talking users, that is the people that are utilizing your services. When we're talking functions, now that speaks to what they can actually do and not do within the environment. And a lot of organizations that I've talked with, they don't seem to have that as well defined, and even more specifically the separation between privileged versus security functions, because those are two different terms. So as you're going about and you're doing this, take a look at that and make sure you're actually addressing that, because again, it comes into play for multiple domains within CMMC, and specifically access controls, as well as IA, and even gets into remote users as well.
Now, so for organizations utilizing MSPs, MSSPs, such as Carahsoft, those organizations are being lumped into this external service provider from what we've seen in the rule. Obviously that can change, so there's a lot that could still happen with that. But currently, any MSP would have to sit in on current assessments, right, to describe their security posture, what they're doing for the organization. Responsibility matrix should be also included, and maybe attached to the SSP as an appendix or something like that. So Alex, is your team prepared to sit through a bunch of assessments until you get certified yourself?
Well, appreciate that. I'll jump in and be a panelist for this question from the Carahsoft perspective. We're not an MSP, but we work with some MSPs, and a lot of the guidance that I've seen on implementing this least privilege access for 800-171 doesn't address this piece of the assessment criteria that you're talking about, the security functions. So to reiterate what you said, the assessment criteria is the security functions must be identified, right? A list of authorized actions that security personnel can perform, and that includes your MSPs, has to be very specific. So security functions like access control configurations, system configuration settings, establishing system accounts, privilege account lists, setting what events will be logged, setting intrusion detection parameters, and so forth, right? Creating that full list of functions, identifying who in the organization is authorized to perform the functions, and then employing least privilege for those accounts. So, to do this, organizations have to document, have to demonstrate that the role-based access control is implemented for security functions as well, and then include screenshots of how the groups are set up, who's assigned, et cetera. Carahsoft works with some great tool providers that can help meet the control. Okta, Microsoft, Ping Identity, the privilege access management providers like the Delinea, CyberArk, StrongDM, Beyond Trust. These guys all help control and monitor the privileged accounts, the security personnel that have elevated access. And then we partner with MSPs and MSSPs that can help implement and manage policies using these tools. So if folks don't have the resources in-house or don't necessarily want to buy and manage the tools themselves, managed providers can help with that. And it's important to pick a provider who is prepared to be a part of that assessment scope. So that's sort of my view on it, Robert.
Yeah, no,
Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The other thing is, once you identify all those functions and have listed them out, you need to also carve out of those which are allowed for remote execution,
Yes.
right? So for remote maintenance. Go ahead, Robert.
And that's something that, Alex, I'm really glad you brought up around RBAC and some of the different ways and the technologies. But guys, we got to wind this back. This isn't about the technology. You just can't buy a technology, put it in and say, okay, configure, now I'm good with PAM. This is, you have to architect. What is your organization structure? What are those security roles? As Alex said, have them defined. Architect this before it's a tool implementation to solve it. So you understand what's in scope, what those security privilege rules are, what are those roles that are specific to around both the security and users. And then, as you also stated, make sure that's part of the SSP. Make sure that that architecture and how because that is a system security plan. How do you plan to roll this out? How is this implemented? And then once you've set that architecture and set those roles and set those categories, then it's what users are part of those and what classes of users and what they have actual access to. So you can ask the hard questions. Is this a needed privilege? Is this least use or just a common use? And so you've got to start with the true understanding of what needs to be architected within your roles, responsibilities within the organization, utilizing RBAC or whatever type that you're utilizing within your organization. But have that plan, have that documented as part of your SSP, and then make sure it's effectively rolled out. And then to the other point, it's attestable. You can have those screenshots. You can have that, the data showing not only do we say that's what we do, not only do we have a plan, this is actually how we've rolled it out and how we've done it.
What you just said, like right there, just listening to what you were talking about made me think about something that I've talked to so many of our customers about. It's about telling a story. You have to tell a comprehensive, compelling story to the auditor. That's what we're talking about here. All of this is about telling that story. If my SSP, which is, kind of like the roadmap, right, to your whole assessment, if my SSP says I'm doing X, that's exactly what everything else should say. Every person I talk to should say, yep, we do X. Every documentation that I look at should say, yep, we do X. And every piece of evidence I see should say, yep, look, we do X. That's the whole goal. You're telling this story to say, yes, we are secure, and I can tell you exactly how in a multitude of different ways. It seems really overwhelming, and it is, but it makes all the difference in the world. Rob and Thomas, I've talked to both of you about this. I don't know how many times. So, do you want to walk into an assessment where somebody, you know, gives you an SSP that like, yeah, there's some stuff in there, but then you start grabbing things and things aren't making sense. I mean, that assessment's going to go on and on and on and on if you do that. So you're really saving yourself money and time eventually if you just do this kind of stuff now, even though it is a huge pain.
And Noelle, one of the things you just brought up as an example, we talked about in the last question about the evidence.
Yeah.
Evidence viewer versus evidence manager. And
Very
that's
true.
an example. You know, the no offense to C3PAOs, they don't need evidence management. If
No.
you have given a Excel spreadsheet, and don't get me started on soapbox about delivering documents that can be changed, PDFs, people, something that is a point in time that cannot be adjusted or changed. But when you give that evidence, if you give somebody evidence management, they can download it, they can edit, they can change it. That's not least use. A C3PO needs to view your evidence, not modify your evidence. So that's a typical example of where we see these failures in when a C3PO walks in, they don't get least use, they get management privileges.
Yeah.
Now,
that's a good point.
here's an interesting tidbit on this, because when Thomas and I are sitting in interview sessions with organizations, they are literally walking us through their process. And by the time so it's not that they're not doing it. So by the time we're done, it's like, why didn't you just write what
just write that down. Just write that down. That seems to be the issue where I've talked to so many people who have gone through assessments, and I've talked to so many C3POs, including you guys. Like, it's just amazing, that simple difference. If you say that you are going to update these policies and procedures annually, that's what needs to happen. You can't tell me that you update them annually, and then if I'm in an interview as a C3PAO and somebody says, well, we do it every 6 months.
So 2 quick things on this.
Not annually.
So the first thing, what we're talking about is, let's say Noelle wins the lottery the day before their assessment. So she's going to go hang out in Bora Bora, and you know she's not going to pay any attention to what Prevail's doing for the rest of her life. Whoever steps into Noelle's role for that, can your documentation identify to them how you are doing this? Can it explain how you're doing access control? Can it explain how you're doing maintenance or physical and environmental security? So that's the first part.
Yeah.
The second part, the onus for CMMC, yes, you have to do 800-171. I think we're all aware of that now. But the onus is what you do as an organization has to reflect what your documentation tells you, because when you start looking through that level 2 assessment guide, the majority of the practices have 2 components, and it's only 2 components, folks. The first one, defined, identified, documented. That speaks to actually putting it down somewhere. The second part is now show me. So if you haven't defined it correctly, how can you properly show it based on what your governance tells you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes all the sense in the world. And what you just said there, how there's the defined part, there's sort of like the written part and then the evidence part. It's that second part that I don't know if you guys have seen it, but we have seen people struggle with that second part of, yeah, I can write a policy all day that says that I'm going to do this. Sure. Like, absolutely. I'll be happy to, but it's the follow through part of it that I think that so many people are struggling with, but I don't know if you guys have seen that too, but we've definitely seen that from customers on our side.
Well, this is where you're seeing people, there's policies,
Mm-hmm.
there's standards, there's guidelines, and then there's processes and procedures.
Exactly. That one right there. Yep.
We're getting plenty of the policies written because, hey, Prevail has a great set of policy templates. We have them in the tool. I mean, they are amazing. And so, but that doesn't say how you're doing it.
Nope.
And also, when Noelle goes to Bora Bora, it doesn't tell her replacement the process, the procedure that is to be followed to meet that policy, that are under specific set of guidelines that meet a standard, and how you're going to do it. And that's what's missing in many cases.
Exactly. Yeah. We've heard that from so many different customers who really, I think we've done a wonderful service as the CMMC community, getting the word out there. I think people find, because I mean, we all know on this call 3 years ago, but people are like, CMMC what? Like, I don't know what that is. So I definitely feel like everybody knows what it is now. They understand what they have to do, but we've sort of miss that second step of, we just tell everybody, hey, SSP policies, and we forget about that evidentiary part of it, that artifact part of it, that we're just, people are like, oh yeah, I mean, they just understand that they need to do that, right? And a lot of our customers we're finding just didn't understand that was essential. I mean, if I'm working at a machine shop and there's 5 people and I'm, in the middle of nowhere and I've got a million other things on my mind and I'm like, oh gosh, I've got to write this SSP and it's huge, I'm not thinking anything past that. But the problem is that's not enough. If I have just an SSP that's filled out beautifully, but no evidence, it doesn't matter.
The other thing, we always try to let folks know as much as possible. You don't have to impress us with your fancy words, your college. We all understand you're certified and everything. You got college degrees. So remember who you're writing these documents for. They are for, first of all, your users, right? So they should be able to understand everything you're documenting in there. And then they're for the assessors. We don't care about the big fancy words. Just tell us what you're doing. Write it in there in plain English, Barney style, as we used to say in the Army. Barney style that all the way down to, if you got to use crayons to color that bad boy in, use crayons.
Rob loves crayons, so use crayons.
I do.
He'll get a kick out of it.
I wasn't a Marine, but I love them.
Oh, ouch.
Come on, we knew he was going to do it, Robert. We knew he was going to do it. We knew that.
You knew it was coming. I love all my brothers and sisters from the branches. It's all good.
It's all in fun. What Thomas said, something that made me think too, Thomas, when you were talking about, when I inevitably go to Bora Bora with my lottery winnings, and thank you, by the way, for wishing that upon me. I'm all about that. I don't think Prevail is, but I am. So when you were saying that, that is part of incident response, or that's part of risk management, making sure that if something happens to an employee and if they're very vital to your organization in some way, that someone could come in and pick up, there's enough documentation and understanding that somebody could come in and pick all that up and pick up those procedural documents like Robert was talking about, and be able to go, you know what, I'm ready to go. I've got my policies and procedures. I know what I need to do. Here's my SOPs, if standard operating procedures or whatever it is that you have. Let's go. So it's not only just for compliance. Like, a lot of this stuff really isn't just compliance. And it's certainly not just for CMMC compliance. I mean, there are so many other frameworks that a lot of this stuff all travels through as well. But it's really to make a more effective operation for you. It really does. I know that it seems like a huge pain, and it is a huge pain again, but it really does make a huge difference when you have a definable, repeatable process that you don't have to worry about.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right, so maybe we move on to the next topic. Great dialogue. We're getting a bunch of questions in the Q&A, so I do want to leave some time for Q&A and some closing thoughts. Maybe I'll pose a question here to the panelists. Do you guys want to talk CUI at rest, beyond CMMC, or log management? Any votes?
They all sound fun.
Bora myself. But,
all right.
Bora.
I'm with Thomas on that.
If you talk about the compliance beyond CMMC, there's a question I was just looking through some of the questions, and somebody posed a really good question about, the FedRAMP SSP and a CMMC SSP, and can we work from a common set of documents? So, Alex, I'm gonna turn it back over to you. That's my suggestion to try to get
let's
some
do
of those.
that. All right, so let's think beyond the world of CMMC. For the Redspin guys, in your experience as C3PAOs, you work with companies that are global, with a diverse client base. They're not just focused on supporting their US DoD programs. What are some of the common challenges for these organizations that may have multiple compliance frameworks to manage across their global infrastructure?
Well, first of all, for these organizations, they sit through assessment after assessment, after audit, after audit, after audit, and most of them are asking the same questions. So wouldn't it be nice if we had some kind of tool where you could, dump these?
Gosh, that would be great, Robert.
Where you could dump.
Robert, do you have something like that?
I don't.
No, that's why I said Robert.
Oh, yeah.
Not Rob.
But, something where you could, NIST 800-171, but I also have ITAR data. So I pull in the ITAR requirements, and now I can see which ones map to each other. So now I don't have to recreate the wheel for every particular practice. And with that, I'll bounce the ball to the other Robert.
Thanks, Dee. And that's absolutely correct. And that was part of the frustration that I, 30 years in this industry as a consultant would go in and do these assessments, was very frustrating because you have the same piece of evidence, whether it's be a TISAX out of Germany or you've got CMMC or FedRAMP, it could be, and these organizations, they're drowning. They're simply what we call OSCs are drowning in assessments because you've got vendor assessments they're having to do. You've got all of these federally mandated assessments, state level CCPA. There has to be a better way to begin to consolidate these so that there's same evidence, same types of discovery. And there is that, what you said, cross mapping. And that's something that, within Cyturus, we are absolutely doing. And I can't say everything's cross map because it just simply isn't. That is, it is a tremendous undertaking. But every time we bring in a new assessment type, is what we call them, a new compliance, we're working and striving to do that cross mapping, to understand, okay, this may have different words and terminology, but your evidence is going to be the same because it's asking the same question in different terminology. And in many cases, it's been translated from another language, from another European Union, or from, like I said, TISAX with Germany. And so you're having to compile this, and the object is to reduce the amount of bandwidth necessary to show the compliance versus actually be compliant.
Mhm.
Nail on the head.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I don't even know
We're
what to do with
not
my
quiet,
hands.
Robert. You just killed it. We're all done. That's
Yeah.
okay. And we're done.
That's his
You have
mic
a
drop
great
moment
day.
right there.
Maybe.
Mike?
All right. Let's talk CUI at rest then. We got a couple more minutes before we get to Q&A. Redspin guys, are you seeing any organizations struggle with protecting CUI at rest? We talked about this a little bit, but maybe we could go into more detail.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Thomas jump on this one, because we did find something in some of the assessments that kind of surround SharePoint and folks using that area or whatever the case may be. So I'll let Thomas go into that because again, this is Phipps Lane and his middle name is Phipps.
First of all, I just want to say, Rob, I have no clue what you're talking about. My name is Robert Hill. I'm not sure. No, so CUI at rest. So keep in mind, Rob just brought up Phipps, but there's two ways you can really address CUI at rest. Number one is via encryption. And as a reminder, if it's encrypted for the confidentiality of CUI, it's got to be Phipps 140 Type 2 validated. However, there's also alternative physical protection. So for instance, if you're moving your backup tapes from, wherever you're collecting the backups at to a secure facility, how do you go about doing it? If you have to download CUI onto external media, and also as a disclaimer, external media isn't just a USB or an external hard drive. There are still CDs, DVDs, or even physical paper CUI. How do you go about protecting that? Both of those are an option for CUI at rest, and both of those potentially have to be accounted for under the requirements of NIST 800-171 or CMMC or even your DFARS 7012 requirements. The specific example Rob was talking about is organizations, may utilize SharePoint for data storage, sharing with their teams, consolidating where some of that information is located at. It's perfectly fine. What we've seen in some, and we're getting into some of the details here, so bear with me. What we're getting into with some of the organizations that utilize that, generally speaking, Microsoft documentation says to enforce the Phipps module use, there's a very specific checkbox within group policy that has to be set. Enable Phipps mode, something, something, something. However, if organizations, when they were testing that, have found that with some of the things for SharePoint, for whatever reason, it breaks communications or it can't operate as it needs to operate. So how do you go about doing it? Well, if you can't do it, one of the ways that we've seen organizations start addressing this is going in and getting an authoritative list of those Phipps modules and ciphers and enforcing only those certificate modules to be utilized. This means, going into the bowels of Microsoft and, deleting certain cipher suites out of there, deleting certain of the modules, and making sure that the ones that are in there are the ones that need to be utilized. Another way that you can address this is, folks, we're not talking about rocket science here. I am a very big believer in not recreating the wheel. So if you can benchmark, if you can baseline against some well-known standard, this brings into play, what Robert Hill and the rest of us have been talking about, all the other stuff that you do. Definitely do it, because from an assessor standpoint, if you tell me you baseline your configurations off of DISA-STIX or CIS benchmarks, or even Microsoft, Red Hat, Linux, whatever the case may be, vendor recommendations, that provides us with that ground to know where you're going about. Because also keep in mind, one of the practices speaks to how does the organization go about ensuring secure architecture, secure engineering when you're setting these things up. And if you can baseline, you can benchmark, now that's half the battle for those practices. You've already identified your methodology that you're using.
And then be able to attest that you're actually following that. It's not just saying that you're doing it.
Right.
Yep.
Actually doing it. Yeah.
And that attestation is via screenshots and screen share during the interview sessions.
And just to throw this out there, guys, there's a lot of these smaller SIBs within the DIB that just aren't, Thomas, they're not going to go into the bowels of SharePoint and make these changes. There are organizations out there that offer this as a service. And while Prevail, that's an absolute awesome partner that manages that as it's in transit, there are other organizations that have this as a service for at rest.
Oh, we also do it at rest.
Yes, absolutely. And so this is why we have, that's one of the partnerships that we have. And so look at making sure that you as a business make a decision. Are we outsourcing this risk to somebody else to manage in that we have their FIPS type 2 compliance? Or are we taking that on ourselves and we are managing that and going into the bowels and setting up and can prove and attest that we have done so? So that's, again, one of those things where the organization has to decide what their risk tolerance is, what their acceptable risk is, and whether they're going to outsource that to another organization or not.
I'm glad that you said that, Robert, because that really is what it is. It's risk mitigation. You have to, every organization is going to have a different thought about it. I mean, every organization is unique. Prevail is definitely not the solution for every single organization. We don't think that we are. We would love it if we could be, but none of us here are always going to be the solution that somebody needs. But definitely, I mean, Prevail's whole bread and butter is being FIPS 140-2 end-to-end encrypted, zero trust file storage and transmission. And like you said, for a relatively, reasonable amount of money, you can just not have to deal with that risk and put it onto a whole company that is dedicated to just this. This is what we do. Yeah, exactly. Much like you or Redspin or Prevail, Cyturus is focused on what it's focused on. You're the dedicated knowledge expert. Like my grandmother used to say, to use a very old Southern colloquialism, don't buy a dog and then bark yourself.
Well, colloquialisms aside, I do want to make, one clarification here for everybody.
Yes.
There is, within the assessment guide, there is provisions that if you're within the secure enclave and the CUI doesn't go outside of that secured boundary, then maybe the encryption doesn't have to be FIPS. I agree with you that is in the documentation. However, now what the onus is on the organization, you still have to show protection of CUI at rest. So are those alternative physical protections, are the other things that you have in place showing that the organization has proper control over these items? Because keep in mind, we're talking technology here, but when you're talking the CUI at rest, that doesn't just speak to the technology, that also speaks to the people as well as the facilities. How are you protecting the CUI at rest when it's in those? So for instance, for your folks, you've got to put them through DoD mandatory CUI training. It's out there, it's free, use it, don't recreate the wheel. So just keep that in mind when you're doing it. Can you get by without it? The assessment guide allots for it, but it is going to be very, I imagine it is going to be very difficult to prove the case with some of those alternative means when the technology is there. And it's like I said, I have that feeling. I can't say specifically one way or another because I personally have not seen an organization try to go that route.
The other thing to remember, since we were talking about risk, is the IT team is not the only one that has risks in an organization. So whatever risk the IT team deems should feed into an overarching organizational risk matrix, right? So
Definitely.
Yeah.
You mean marketing's in play, Rob?
Yes.
Oh, sir.
Marketing, HR.
Everybody. Everybody's in there. Everybody.
Yeah.
All right, we're coming close to the top of the hour. Let's see if we can sneak in a couple questions from the Q&A. So let me scroll through here.
Yeah, I see a lot of great questions.
A lot of great questions.
Yeah, there's so many good ones.
Maybe, all right, let's go with this one. Do you accept the SSP as an authoritative piece of evidence for assessment, or is it a roadmap for OSCs to provide evidence for C3PAO review? I'll repeat it. Do you accept SSP as authoritative piece of evidence for assessment, or is it a roadmap for OSCs to provide evidence for C3PAO review?
I'll answer you in short, Alex.
Yeah.
It's not a piece of evidence, it's required. That when you go into your scoping calls and your kickoffs, that is one of the things that is specifically asked for. Now, can it be for your authoritative documentation? Maybe, if the implementation is quote unquote system specific. But if you're saying you're inheriting anything from your parent organization, if you will, based upon that guidance, it still comes into play. I mean, think about this. You spend all this time writing an SSP. Do you want to literally have to update it every single time a small change is made to your environment? That could be new users, new services, new systems, new applications, new ways of doing things. That's where the catch-22 comes in with just relying on that SSP. It's required, it's expected, but personally, I wouldn't rely on just that to be my authoritative documentation.
Yeah. And how hard is that going to be? What if you do need to find the answer to something? What, you're going to go through like 150 pages to find an access list of, who's going to be coming in? I mean, that's insane. Like if I need to give somebody a laptop, I'm like the IT manager and I need to assign a laptop, I have to go into the SSP and like search all the way down, find the right control and add that person's name and scratch somebody else off. That just doesn't make sense from a practical standpoint.
Yeah, I was going to say, to make it easier, the SSP should be what you're doing and the POAM should be what you want to do.
And all your procedures are how you're doing it.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Let's see. 1 minute. Let's try to get one more in. This one for Robert Hill. Could you talk a little bit about how to merge FedRAMP SSP with CMMC Docs? Can we work from the same group of docs, or is there a separate CMMC SSP?
All right, there is a separate template. The FedRAMP SSP is much more detailed. There's a lot more things on it. As to whether a C3PO will take a FedRAMP SSP, I'm gonna have to turn that over to the guys that are C3POs. From my perspective within the tool, there are two different templates, but it pulls the data from the same locations. So if you've got a piece of evidence that's used the same for both, it's going to show in both of those documents. Your SSP is that plan. It's that guide. It's the reference material that says, this is what we're doing. This is our implementation summary or our control summary, our implementation solution. And this is where the documentation for that is located. And then you have that same evidence attestation that's going to be applicable for both. But if you use a tool, that tool should be able to produce both of them for you because they are two different types of documents, even though it's the same data, preliminary, mostly the same data for both of them. Robert, Thomas?
No, I agree with you.
Right.
Nailed it on the head.
Brandon,
don't know what to do with my hands.
Brandon, could you share the screen with the follow-up contact information? And so I guess with that, I appreciate everybody for joining today. I think it was a really great discussion. Robert and Thomas from Redspin, Noel from Prevail, and Robert Hill from Cyturus. Thank you so much. there's some contact information up here on the screen for each of the 4 companies. Any of the teams represented will be able to help answer questions and get you to the right place. We'll do a thorough job of following up with everyone's individual questions offline from the Q&A portal. And really appreciate everybody's engagement today. Any last words from our panel, or you want to sign off for us?
Sure. So I know you mentioned closing thoughts. So if I can, I'm gonna give you 2. First of all, understand the requirements are DFARS, are your DFARS 7012 requirements. All CMMC is the validation of the requirements. And as a reminder, DFARS 7012 has been enforceable since December 31st of 2017.
Yep.
So please keep that in mind. The other thing is, if you're listening to this and you have an ATO or you're FedRAMP certified, please understand that is focusing on what you're fielding to somebody, whether it be internal DoD or FedRAMP certified, somebody else using it. What CMMC speaks to is your own organizational processes. So in that case, things that you may have implemented during FedRAMP, during your ATO process or whatever, can help you, but it is a different perspective. So, please don't make that mistake. And I will shut up now.
Appreciate that. Noelle, closing thoughts from the Prevail side?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking us to join. This has been fantastic. It's been great to talk with everybody and have this conversation. And to Thomas's point, just making sure that you can get all this stuff done and make it done effectively and make sure it makes sense and all these things that we've talked about the whole day. Whatever we can do at Prevail to help anybody get, through this craziness that is CMMC, we're happy to do it. What about Rob?
And Robert Hill.
And Robert.
From Cytourus. Closing thoughts?
Absolutely. Guys, we're all in this together. And I think that's the thing that we have to remember. And we're here to support you as OSCs. And if it's a tool that you need, if it's, meeting with the parameters and the policies and the offerings that, and I saw a bunch of questions about Prevail. Guys, I can't say enough positive things about what they're doing to help organizations. And Robert, you and Thomas have been so phenomenal to work with because, we're all in this. We are here to help the OSCs, but ultimately we're all here to protect the DoD information. And, all of us are here to protect the defense industrial base of the United States. And that's what we're doing together. So when I hear the excuses and I hear a lot of things, I think back and say, what's the motivation? We're all here together. This isn't trying to, point fingers at somebody. So anything we can do to help, that's why we're here. That's why we're having these.
Great point. I'll close it out with, for all of the organizations seeking certification, the OSCs that Robert keeps referring to, you guys have an important role for what you do for the Department of Defense and mostly our warfighters. And as a warfighter that's been on the ground and utilized almost everybody's solutions that are out there, that is very, very important because, we can't fight our nation's wars and win without you. So is it important? It's important that you follow and do what you have to do so you can continue to provide those services to our DoD.
Absolutely.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you, Robert. Brandon, anything you want to close us out with?
Yes, thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody on our panel, and thank you, everybody in attendance for joining us today, too. We definitely hope you all found this very helpful, both to you and your organizations. And like we said, there were unfortunately way more questions than we could possibly hope to get to today, so we'll be sure to follow up offline. On top of the information on your screen right now, you can expect to receive a follow-up email with all of the contact information within 2 days following today's presentation. And that will contain a recording of today's conversation as well, so that you can review it, share it with a colleague, and just recap all of the great information you heard. So like we said, feel free to keep an eye on your inbox, whatever email you use to register for the event, you will receive to that email. And if you did qualify for all of the CP credits that we offered today, you can expect to receive that certificate soon. Otherwise, I am displaying an evaluation form right now. We would love to get your feedback on today's presentation to help us better shape presentations in the future. I don't think there's anything everyone on the panel could have done any better. I had a great time, learned a lot, so really appreciate it. And I think that is otherwise all from me. So really appreciate everyone's time today. Thanks again, and please keep in contact. We'll be sure to follow up on the rest of those questions.